Alrighty. Welcome everyone to the Logical Belief Ministries podcast. This is our first YouTube hangout, and we today are going to have a discussion on there's some atheists that I have been in contact with and have agreed to come on the show. So I want to thank them for joining us today. We wanted to have a discussion. I wanted to often atheist and Christian discussions tend to centralize around the obvious, difference between us, the existence of God. But since that is most commonly the discussion, and that's probably where this discussion today will go to. But I wanted to start off with maybe a little bit of a different focus today, and look at some of the differences between the Christian worldview and the atheistic worldview when it comes to us as human beings, who we are, our makeup. Do we have a will? Do we have the ability to reason? How do we account for those things? And so I asked Christopher, an atheist, to come on and join me. We've been in contact before. We have communicated. We've actually dialogued via the Bible thumping wingnut. For those of you guys that are not familiar with the Bible thumping wingnut, I would encourage you to check them out. So we have dialogued over there, and also invited the realistic nihilist to join us today also. He had emailed me a couple weeks ago and asked if we could do a discussion sometime, so I invited him on today, which should make this dialogue interesting. So I'm going to, without further ado, just going to go ahead and bring Christopher into the broadcast. And Christopher, I just unmuted, thought I unmuted your mic. I'm clicking unmute, but it doesn't seem to be unmuting you. Christopher, you may have to disconnect and rejoin. For some reason, I'm clicking on the unmute button for you, and it is not unmuting you. Oh, click broadcast? Okay. Show and broadcast.
There we go. Now I have control over my mute. When we're not when we're not live and I'm not broadcast, you can mute and unmute me.
Okay, I got you.
Live, you need to broadcast me.
Okay.
But good morning.
Yeah, good morning, Christopher.
How are you doing today, man?
I'm doing great. So go ahead and just give our listeners just a brief introduction for yourself. And actually, this is going to be, I don't know you that well myself, other than, I've seen you on the Bible thumping wingnut. And so I'd like to, know a little bit more about you myself. So go ahead and just give us a brief introduction for yourself.
Sure. So my name's Christopher Maute. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, I can hear you.
And there was a while where I had a podcast or a video podcast or just a show, whatever you want to call it, on YouTube called Meeting of the Minds. I did that for about 1.5 years. And it initially started in the framework of the New Covenant Group, which is also a broadcast network. And then I eventually did it on my own. And the point of it, as the title kind of betrays, is I wanted to come to a meeting of the minds with people I disagreed with, whether they be theists, deists, atheists, or whatever. And, it was an ability, it was an opportunity to disagree without being disagreeable. I consider myself an atheist. On some days I consider myself an apatheist. I don't really care much for labels, so long as in each other's positions. What else? That's about it. I manage a laboratory that studies psychology, the psychology of olfaction, of smell, and and that's it. And I like having these kinds of discussions.
Well, then you should be well equipped to have this discussion when it comes to if you've had some training in psychology. Um, you might actually even be better equipped than I am. I'm just a lay Christian who just loves studying theology and philosophy, and love dialoguing and talking with other people about my faith and the differences of the Christian worldview with the atheistic worldview. So the reason I actually wanted to talk about this particular topic really has to do with a lot of things that are going on in the news today and in our world when it comes to a lot of the terrorism that's going on,
Sure.
a lot of the evil actions that men are doing against other men. This has obviously happened throughout all history, but this is obviously in the forefront of our minds right now with a lot of the things that are going on. And so the first question I wanted to kind of discuss, Christopher, was from your worldview, the not God position, how would you as an atheist account for evil in the heart of man? In other words, as a Christian, we have a doctrine which you may be familiar with, known as total depravity. And so we have a particular view on why man has the heart that he does. Why does he have this propensity towards evil, and what causes and what is behind man? What is the cause behind men who do evil acts upon other men? How do you, as an atheist, how do you account for basically evil in the heart of man?
So, a couple of things. Among myself, I'm sure that there are others that would disagree that there is an atheistic worldview. So I can only speak for myself, and my worldview is more shaped by the positive philosophies that I engage with, which would be secular humanism, which makes positive claims about existential and metaphysical questions and things like that. Whereas atheism is just the negation of one particular slice of the pie chart of a worldview. That being said, answering why there is evil in the hearts of men begs the question that there is evil in the hearts of men, and that taps into morality. And I have to admit that lately I've been charmed by the notion of moral nihilism. I don't necessarily think that there are universal goods or bads. I think that there are behaviors that either move towards or away from goals that you have, and labeling things as good or bad depend on what the goals are that you have.
Okay, then from your position, can I briefly engage with those statements?
Yeah.
So from a moral nihilistic position, so let me make sure I'm understanding your position correctly. You would be saying that there are no true moral statements. Would that be your position?
I would be reluctant to. No, I haven't thought this completely through. Like I said, I'm recently charmed by the notion that there is really no such thing as morality. There are merely behaviors that move towards or away from goals.
Okay. So what then, going back to the original question with the evil that I would as a Christian call evil, the actions of wicked men, as I would say, upon others, killing them and blowing them up and things like that. What would you call that then, from a position of moral nihilism? What do you say about that? Is there anything inherently wrong with that, objectively wrong with that? Is it you just don't have an opinion? How would you address these things in the world that are going on today?
Well, couched in the way that I explained how I understand moral nihilism is that there really aren't morals; there are merely behaviors. The goals that I happen personally to have goals of making the world a better place for future humans. That is a goal of mine. A goal of mine is not to engage in unnecessary harm to others. Is for well-being for all, right? So since those are my goals, anything that thwarts them, I would consider moving away from those goals. So if you wanted to put it in moral terms, they would be considered bad. So what accounts for it? Natural selfishness.
Okay, so would you say that your particular goal that you're saying here is the least harm? Would you say that's a better goal than the goal of the terrorists?
Least harm. Well, it depends. The least harm goal is a short-term goal for the long-term goal of making the world a better place for all humans, which encompasses religious and cultural plurality. So that works for me. There are others, of course, not of course, but more recently, the people who are engaging in the terrorist actions are of a certain religious belief. Lone wolves or cells, or whether they are representative of that religious belief. And, just so that we're not talking in code, we're talking about Islam, we're talking about Muslims. Even though they may not be representative of that religion, they are doing it in the name of religion. And so they may have an overarching goal of making Muslim a global religion and acting against people who are apostates or who go against what their culture determines is morally good or bad, and making people suffer the consequences for doing the things that their culture and their religion deem as bad.
Okay, so your goal is to make the world a better place, and the terrorist goal is to make it an Islamic place, right?
Well,
So
to them, that might be a better place as well.
Absolutely. But from your position, is one of these better than another? Is one of these goals better than another?
Objectively, no.
Okay, so you would have no basis by which to then talk to somebody that is a terrorist or anyone else that engages in has a different worldview than you do, or at least when it comes to your purpose here. You're saying your purpose is here to make it a better place, but somebody else says, well, I'm a hedonist. My purpose here is to, bring self-pleasure. From your position, do you have anything that you can say and discuss by saying that your position is better than his? Or you just say, okay, well, that's your preference. I really have nothing to say about that.
So this works on several levels. You can be a hedonist and a contributing member to society. If you are a hedonist that is not a contributing member to society and is, in being a hedonist, you will probably cause self-harm, whether it's through gluttony or through promiscuity, or, whatever causes most pleasure to you, right? Hedonism and hedonics is all about pleasantness and pleasure. So, you can be a hedonist and a contributing member to society. And so long as you're a contributing member to society that meets my goals, as far as influencing me and my family and the people I care about, you can do whatever you'd like. And that's the nuclear version, right? So long as your hedonism doesn't impact me, my family, and my friends, then you can have at it.
So let's say you have a member of your family who is a hedonist who does cause harm. Let's say he thinks that, raping small children is what brings him the most pleasure. Would you have, what's that?
That's a ridiculous example, but okay.
Okay. Well, okay. But there are people that do that, right? So I don't know why it would be a ridiculous example. Are there people in this world
we went from hedonism to sociopathy and pedophilia.
Okay, but let's even just say that. So let's say that there is a person that has that particular outlook on life.
Mm-hmm.
would you, once again, would you tell them that your position is objectively better than theirs, or that's just their personal preference, just like you just explained the hedonist that's just his thing as long as he doesn't bother me?
Okay. Well, that's where personal morals shift to societal morals. And societal morals are more utilitarian from my perspective, right? Personal morals should be, if you believe in morals, or as I would say, personal behaviors that move towards or away from goals, are much more hierarchical, or what's it? There's a word I want to use I can't think of right now. I can't think of this word right now. It's self-actualizing behaviors that move towards and away from goals, right? That's where I personally work from. In the society in which I live, the moral code will be codified in laws that are utilitarian. What is the greatest good for the most people? So since my personal goals are not to rape children for fun, if a family member of mine was doing that, then I would address them based on how I understood things. From a legal perspective, they would be causing harm utilitarian-wise because they are not producing the most good for the most people. They're producing the most good for that one individual, and that just works against the society in which I feel comfortable maneuvering in.
Oh, okay, but you're saying that society here is the determinative on whether something should be, so let's say somebody says, well, I don't agree with that. I don't agree that society is the one that determines, because it sounds to me kind of like you're begging the question a little bit here. You're still assuming the greatest good is the objective standard. And so you're saying that when somebody goes against what is the greater good of humanity, then society should, in fact, have laws and things in place in order to take care of those people who don't have this standard, which you're saying is not objective, but it seems to me you're applying it objectively, the greatest good standard that you're trying to use.
Since we live in a democracy and I get to vote for policies, and I get to choose where I live, if I choose not to live here in this democracy, I can choose to live in other ones that have different rules. What I'm saying is my greater goal of making the world a better place for everybody, for future humans, that will be met by the way that I vote, the way that I vote for policies, the way that I vote for people that uphold certain policies, and it'll reflect the society in which I choose to live. I choose to live in a society that shares the behaviors that move towards the goals that I have.
Okay, but that seems to be like you're still just simply assuming that the greatest good is the best standard, is the objective standard that we should hold to.
Well, no,
that's that assumption. Everything that you're saying.
I made a distinction between my my self-actualized goals from which I work. Like I will behave based on my moral compass, right? And I expect reciprocity. It's a social contract that I have with others that they will do the same. And if that moral compass of theirs goes against mine and breaks my personal and social boundaries, I will act accordingly. In society at large, I think that it goes away from self-actualized because I don't think that everybody has the same goals or has the same motivation or has thought about what their goals and values are to the extent that I have. I think that it's more necessary. It is pragmatic for it to be more utilitarian in society.
So is it objectively something that we should all do, is to be reciprocal to others who look for the greatest good? Because you did say that other people need to engage in reciprocity when it comes to you're going out there. Your goal is to be to bring about the greatest good, and so other people should be reciprocal to that. So is that an objective claim that people ought to be reciprocal, or is that just something that you prefer?
Once again, that way. I'm going to frame this according to goals. If your goal is to have a society that works, reciprocity is one of the mechanisms that'll facilitate that.
Okay, so that's more pragmatism. So you're just saying that if it works, that's what makes it good.
I'm not applying the word good.
Okay, but you did say that if you want a society to work, you have to do it in this way. So that's what determines
Well, that's
your.
not actually what I said. I
Okay.
didn't say that. I didn't use the phrase "have to." I said that one of the mechanisms that facilitates a society that works is reciprocity.
Okay. Does a society need to work?
It depends on what your goals are. If you want humanity to exist, and then we're getting into what some would deem a biological value, right? Then we're going to get into ideas of like Antonio Damasio and other neuroscientists that say that survival is the base assumption, biologically speaking. So in order to survive, we are social creatures. So that means that we need to have a society that facilitates the spreading of our genes, the selfish gene idea. So, I mean, you can get into those. I mean, if you're asking me objectively what morality is, my straight up answer is going to be, I don't know. But what we're doing right now is having a discussion about how I understand it up to this point. And I reserve the right to change my mind based on studying it more.
Okay, that's fine. The next question I just wanted to ask: does the word evil, does that mean anything to you? Is it meaningful within, or good or bad? Are those words meaningful to you? Well, let's stick with just the word evil at this point. Is that meaningful to you within a moral nihilistic position?
No.
So that's a meaningless word. So you wouldn't actually call
well,
terrorists are doing as evil.
No.
Okay, it's just what they do according to their, they're just the result of naturalistic processes. So it's just the result of naturalistic processes in their brains. That's just what they do. It just is. That's just the way it is.
Yes.
Okay, that's interesting. So, okay.
Now, if you're asking me what the value of what their behavior is, then I have a specific answer to that. I don't think that it goes against the goals that I have. I think that it goes against the goals of most societies, and it goes against the biological value of survival.
So this is really actually why I wanted to kind of have this discussion, because I don't think, this is just my opinion, but I do not believe that our society today, as it becomes more secularized, and many people have kind of the same view that you do, is that our nation today and many other Western nations are losing because they've lost the concept of God as being the moral arbitrator. They can no longer meaningfully address evil. And so that is why I believe in a lot of these cases, when it comes to, we look at, even after Islam, does, as from my Christian worldview, evil acts all over the world, that our media and a lot of people will still purport Islam to be a peaceful religion, and they doesn't seem to me that they have a worldview in order to actually to engage with what's going on and actually call evil what it actually is, and that is that which goes against the character of God, and is inherently evil, and that word actually has meaning. And so,
what does losing mean when you say the nations are losing?
well, I mean, I think a lot of as many nations, especially in the Western nations, lose the concept of God. They lose that moral bearing in order to actually call something evil. So that's what I mean by when we lose the grounding and the foundation in our minds. When we abandon that concept, we don't have grounds anymore by actually even calling what is going on evil. We have no moral grounding for that. In fact, this even goes back to, I believe, at the Nuremberg trials. The Nazis said that, well, what they did was not evil because there is no objective standard. So their society determined it was good, and since society can, determine for themselves, what ought to happen, then they did not violate that standard, and there was no reason for nations to prosecute them. So,
and that sounds like it's it mostly has to do with framing, right? And when you talk about morality, you can talk about the me versus us kind of morality, which is like the hedonistic within my culture. Why should I not do what I want? And why should I do what's the best for us? Collectivist is a me versus, and then there's the word is the us versus them. As the world becomes more, we understand that within cultures, they think that they're being reasonable. Within our culture, we think that we're being reasonable. There are some overarching things that we would call moral about, having to do with like murder and suffering and stuff like that. But the details are very different between cultures. And so how do we deal with the morality between tribes? And I think that that's much more difficult to deal with, and I don't think that anyone has an answer. And if your answer is Christianity, then you would have to globalize your version of Christianity in order for your utopic vision to come to fruition.
Well, I don't have a utopic vision. I don't think that this world's ever going to become Christian, but I believe that the Christian God determines the standard. So this comes back to, do you think, so let me ask it this way. So since your position is that society, it sounds to me like you don't really have a position on whether one society ought to tell another society that what they are doing is wrong and they should cease from those particular actions because their own society approves of that. And this goes back to my original premise. I don't think our Western society any longer has a worldview that's capable of dealing with other societies who are actually engaging in objective evil, but they don't have a worldview in order to deal with it. And I think your last statement kind of proved my premise there and my thesis there, because you just, I think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but you did say that there needs to be more thought, and you don't really know whether one society ought to impose itself upon another one and correct what they deem from their society to be wrong. Did I understand you correctly on that?
Yeah, I'm not in a position of foreign relations where my goals and values are to be imposed onto others. For the societies that resonate with the goals and values that I have, we will, not we as in me personally, but the society that I live in and the society that they live in will become allies in fighting against societies that cross the boundaries of what we consider morally correct and incorrect.
Okay. So would you say it's objectively wrong for one society to impose its morals upon another?
No.
Okay. So you wouldn't have a problem if a society actually did that, though?
They can try, and then we will see what happens.
Yeah. But you wouldn't have any objection, like you wouldn't say they ought not to do that.
They ought not to do that. Based on the structure of the society I live in, if they were to cross a boundary based on the goals of that society, there would be consequences via justice.
But you would just say that's just the way it is. It's not that it's wrong for them to do that. So when a terrorist comes over here and flies planes into the World Trade Center, it's not that they ought not to do that, but there might be consequences for them if they do that. Like we might bomb Afghanistan.
Are you speaking objectively, or are you talking objectively, or based on my goals?
No, I'm speaking objectively. Is there ought they not to do that? Because if you're just saying your own personal subjective goals, that's your own subjectivity. That only applies to you. So So I
To
am
an
speaking
extent, it does.
objectively. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, to an extent, it does. It is also shaped by the culture I live in and shared by the people in the culture I live in, such that the justice system will punish people who don't, abide by the structure that is set in place. The structure that is set in place is utilitarian, and the structure that is set in place is to move forward the goals of that society, of which I share some, but not all. That being said, if somebody were to, from a different society or culture, were to come into the society and culture that I live in and act in a way that is punishable, which is against the goals that are non-utilitarian, that are not for the greatest good of the greatest people, then there are consequences. Should they? From their perspective, they should. From my perspective, they shouldn't. Is that objectively wrong or right? I don't understand. I don't have the knowledge to make the claims of what is and is not objectively right or wrong.
Would you ever oppose anything within our society that like actively work against? Would you ever oppose anything within our society that would go against your own subjective, your own subjective greatest good standard?
I do every time I vote.
Okay, but why would you impose your standard on somebody else by voting?
I'm not imposing. I'm flexing my right to
Okay.
do so. I'm given that right in the society I live in, and by voting for people who have a platform that resonates with me, and not voting for people that have a platform that doesn't resonate with me. And of course, it's always a lesser of evils, because I don't really want most of the people that are placed before me.
Okay.
But that being said, that's how I act against the people that are doing things that I don't like.
Okay. So if somebody else came along and said that, your vote goes against, my own personal preference, you're working against it.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't like that.
Okay.
Is that something that you're still willing to do from your position, that it's just subjective and you should not impose your beliefs upon others?
So I shouldn't vote according to my conscience because another person disagrees with me?
Well, I mean, would it be objectively wrong to do that?
Would it be objectively wrong? Yeah, I'm gonna go back to what I said. I don't really have the knowledge to determine what is objectively right or wrong. So I guess I'll say I don't know.
Okay. Okay. So let me ask you this. This is the next thing. So I'm assuming you're a materialistic naturalist. Is that correct?
What does that mean?
In other words, would you say that that we are the result? I mean, obviously, I would assume you believe in evolution. Is that correct?
I do accept evolution.
Okay. So
The scientific theory of evolution.
okay, yeah. Would you say that we are simply the result of natural processes, chemical reactions? That's what we are a result of.
Excuse me. I'm drinking seltzer over here and it's giving me gas. A little agita too. As it stands right now, I don't have any reason to believe that there is anything other than nature.
Okay. So for you, all that exists is what is material. You don't have any grounding or justification for anything that is immaterial.
Oh, sure I do. Electromagnetic force.
Well, that is part of the electromagnetic force is still
immaterial. Forces are immaterial. Gravity is immaterial. Weak and strong nuclear forces are immaterial. Electromagnetic force is immaterial.
They still exert force within space-time. So, like for example, gravity just distorts space-time. So
I agree, but that's not material. If your definition, so just to clarify, if your definition of material are things that exist in space-time, then yes, but that's not my understanding of what material is.
Okay, yeah, I just find something as material as that which extends into space. So, I mean, you would like for example, you're, I'm sure, well familiar with Einstein's equation,
Hmm.
energy mass equivalency. So even things that energy, for example, are um, and mass are equivalent. So anything that extends or exerts itself into space and time would be considered part of the material universe. So that is those things, the strong, weak nuclear forces, gravity, electromagnetic energy, all that, and matter itself is all that you believe exists. Correct? You don't have any justification for anything outside of that.
Right now, well, of course, I believe that consciousness exists, and as to whether consciousness is completely born out of material, I mean, that is the theory that I'm working from. But the mind-body dualistic position, I think, I don't think is a fruitful one to move forward with philosophically. I think that mind and body, to answer your material immaterial question. I think
That
that
was actually the very next thing I wanted to go to when you brought up consciousness. But yeah, keep on going.
Yeah, I think that the dualistic position is fruitless when it comes to trying to understand consciousness.
Okay, so if that's fruitless, then consciousness is somehow uh, simply natural processes occurring within our minds.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so if we're simply natural processes occurring, then man, what man does, the actions that he performs. For example, I'm a Christian theist.
Okay.
You're a professing atheist. So you're simply a professing atheist because of natural processes in your mind, and I am a Christian theist simply because of natural processes in my mind. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So then why are you here having this discussion?
Because you asked me to.
Okay. Okay. But that would be the question, Christopher, from your worldview, that
Mm-hmm.
I'm just a Christian theist because my brain fizzes that way, and you're just an atheist because your brain fizzes that way. Why
Oh,
do you
that's a
join the Bible thumping wingnut and have discussions with Christians and
because I have behaviors that are motivated by intent.
Okay, but intent assumes will again, and assumes things like you know consciousness, and
Mm-hmm.
I would
And,
can
and
you provide
consciousness.
any sort of explanation about a rock doesn't have has being, but it doesn't have consciousness, it doesn't have intent, it doesn't, and that's just a natural thing.
Sure.
Sodium mixing with vinegar, doesn't is just a natural process. It doesn't have an intent. When I shake a can of, Dr. Pepper and I
Mm-hmm.
pop the top, that doesn't have intent.
Dr. Pepper. Oh,
Oh. I can use a different example if you
all
want.
the sodas. You pick the
I
most
had to pick
disgusting
Dr.
one.
Pepper. But if I shake it, you wouldn't say that that has a particular and pop the top. You wouldn't say that that can of soda has a particular intent,
Of
right?
course not. No.
Okay, so why do you have intentions if you're just a natural process?
Well, if you're going to talk about consciousness, I'm going to go ahead and throw my hat in with all of the other great thinkers of the past several centuries and say that I don't have the answer for consciousness. The current answer that resonates with me the most is once again, the idea put forth by Antonio Damasio that within nature, there are things with and without nervous systems. Of the things with nervous systems that have evolved, to have central and peripheral nervous systems like we have predictive map making tendencies, and these map making tendencies facilitate our brain to be more efficient, and that is what mind comes from. And then through evolution, we've come through several phases where the mind has certain forms of self, and humans happen to be the manifestation of how a autobiographical self comes to the mind that is born out of predictive models and mapping that occur within our version of nature, which has a nervous system.
Yeah, so if I understand you correctly, you just described the natural system, nervous system. So you're just assuming consciousness. It didn't really give an answer for consciousness.
What do you mean I'm assuming consciousness?
Well, you didn't give me a reason for why we have consciousness. You just said that, things that have a nervous system seem to have at least some level of self-consciousness and self-awareness. But that really just assumes it. That just begs the question.
Oh, sure. You're right. So my answer, I did give an answer, and the answer was I don't know.
Okay.
The theory that resonates with me the most right now is that consciousness is the emergent property of this autobiographical self coming to the mind that exists in the brain, which has a patternicity of predictable models and predictive mapping, and central nervous system all the way back down.
Now, would you agree, going back, because now we've had two discussions, kind of, we've had one discussion on morality, and we've had a discussion on consciousness. Would you agree and concur with me that the Christian worldview does provide the justification for those types of things? Consciousness, for example. Does the Christian worldview, in your opinion, justify that?
Since my answer to where did morality come from and what is morality is I don't know, and what is consciousness and where did it come from, it is also I don't know. Exactly. I will say that Christianity provides an answer to each of those.
Okay. So then my question would be, why, if from your worldview, you don't have an answer for consciousness, and when it, even for the answer to morality, you just don't know. Mm-hmm. It seems to me that you assume consciousness, and that you do, even, we did have some dialogue back and forth, but from my perspective, it seemed to me you kept assuming, at least at some level, some things that men should do. So, and you can maybe disagree with me on that, but my question would be is, why do you assume consciousness, and why do you assume, at least to some degree, a few oughts, if your worldview doesn't account for it? Why do you assume these things? Why don't you just relinquish your belief in them?
It seems built into your question that I need to have accounted for them in order to acknowledge that they exist.
Okay. But I think that would be the thing that you would ask for me as a Christian. You would say that I would need to account for the God in order to say that he exists, right?
Oh, no, I don't know. That's where I'm different from other atheists. I will never ask you to prove your God or to show why your worldview is better than mine. I'm not interested. That's where I'm an apatheist.
Okay. Alrighty. Do you have any questions? Let me see here. I think we kind of went through. Let me ask this. This is one more question I wanted to have. Well, I think I kind of touched on this, but we're going back to that we are just, you said you fizz atheism, I fizz Christian theism.
Well, I didn't say that. You said that, and I let it slide and started talking about the
how would you look at it
of the nervous system.
Okay.
What's that?
So then, how would you describe it differently then, if you don't like my analogy there?
Well, it is so reductionistic to say that, what is going on in our brain based on how I described it, which is very nuanced and sophisticated, and that's based on an understanding that may or may not be right, to just say, well, fizz. No, that's just like,
well, you
that
might
is
say
so simplistic.
Is that what you're saying? It's just an oversimplification?
Indeed, it's reductionistic. Yes, there are chemical processes that are going on, but we're not just the chemical processes. The chemical processes, from an evolutionary perspective, serve a function, and that function is, depending on what it is, right? So if it's appetitive or if it's aversive, then you have different neurotransmitters that are going on in your brain that either signal to move towards or to move away. And what does that do? I mean, and that's where the biological value or the genetic value of survival comes in. We are, from a strictly biological perspective, and I don't think that this is really something to build a morality on, we are strictly, survival machines.
Okay, so you said, you didn't make the comment here, it says we are not just chemical processes. And then you proceeded to describe several different chemical processes. So if we're not just chemical processes, what is it other than a chemical process that we are?
We are everything other than chemical processes, and including chemical processes that facilitates the emergence of consciousness.
What is that?
I've already admitted that I don't know the answer to consciousness, to exactly what it is or where it came from.
Okay, so you would describe that the other thing that we are more. You're saying that we are something more than just chemical processes, and you would say that that thing that is more than just a chemical process is consciousness. Is that how I'm understanding you?
No. Well, I don't know. That may be how you're understanding me, but that's not necessarily what I'm saying.
Okay.
So chemical processes are one of the many different processes that occur in a human organism, whose goal is survival, or another way to look at it is life regulation.
But that's just determined by its chemical processes, though, right?
That's very reductionistic, right? Chemical processes aren't the only thing that are going on.
Okay, what else would it be that's going on?
There's electrical processes, there are behaviors, there are motivations and intents.
Which are still natural processes. So, okay, so chemical...
So you're reducing natural processes down to chemical processes?
Well, no, let's I mean, I was using that as a... let's say electromagnetic, all natural processes. So the only thing, are we anything other than just natural processes?
From my perspective, no. I have no reason to believe that we are anything other than nature.
Okay. Okay, so that's where I was getting to, because it seemed like you were saying that there was something beyond. And when I meant chemical, I was using that as idiomatically for just all processes. So, okay. So if someone is simply as we said before, just the result of natural processes, I'm a Christian theist and you're an atheist. Would you say that men are in any way responsible for their actions? Now, I know that in their responsibility assumes an objective standard, but would you even use the word responsible at all? That men are responsible for anything?
Depending on the goals and values of the individuals and of the individuals within the society and the society at large that we live in, right? It assumes responsibility, assumes an obligation. An obligation assumes that there is a society within which you are responsible for your obligations, right? And we are social animals. So as far as nature goes, we are a subset of nature that are social organisms. So within the framework of societies, how that answer would be given.
So if a society did not hold an individual, let's say, guilty for the act of murder, let's just use that as an example. If a society did not, your society specifically, did not hold an individual guilty for murder, would you object to that?
If my well, okay, without getting too deep into it depends. If my society didn't attempt to pursue justice in the face of a murder, then I would consider that a wrong.
Okay, but how? You just said that it was based upon whether they went against societal norms. Why would you object to that?
Because, as I understand your question, you asked if society didn't go against somebody who murdered, and you said my society. Well, my society does have a justice system that goes after people who murder. So if they didn't do that, they'd be going against the very structure that I agree to live in this society.
Well, but okay, let's give you an example. I think, for example, abortion is murder. And so I believe that society is not, going against and performing justice in this. So I'm going to do something now. Let's say that maybe at this point, now I'm assuming you probably are a supporter of abortion. You can correct me if I'm wrong on that. Are you or aren't you?
I am a supporter of the availability of abortion.
Okay, so let's move it up a little bit. Let's say infanticide. I'm assuming that you are not a supporter of infanticide.
The purposeful killing of children?
Yeah. The same way as killing them in the womb. If they're not necessary, if they're not needed, if they're going to cause a problem in my life, they're going to be inconvenient, we can eliminate them. You would object to that,
Killing
right?
children due to inconvenience?
Mm-hmm.
Children that are born?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Children that are born. The same way as
No.
people kill unborn children for convenience.
Okay. No, I wouldn't say that that's right.
Okay, you would say that that's okay. So if a society did that, if a particular society did that, I mean, we can even take examples of, well, there's obvious examples. We have Stalin, Pol Pot, Hitler. The obvious examples of, let's take Hitler's society. The German people as a society didn't have an issue with the extermination of Jews. So would you oppose that society? And would you say that they're wrong? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So why, if your standard, you were saying, if anything outside of yourself, outside of your own subjectivity, you were saying that your own do the greatest good, what you think is the greatest good is your own standard, but that only applies to you. And when anything that goes beyond that applies to other people, it's determined by what society, the society that you're in. So if your society approves of that, then from your position of subjectivity, how can you oppose that? How can you oppose
what
and
would
say
prevent
that
me?
Well, I mean, nothing's going to prevent you. I would say that you would be reacting. Let's say you were reacting on an obvious injustice. I would say that you would be acting consistently with the fact that God has revealed to you moral oughts, and that you're recognizing when people are violating that, and you're demanding justice. But the concept of justice doesn't really exist if a society simply is what determines it, because justice then is a fluid thing that just moves based upon what society determines at that point, and different societies can have different justices.
Yep.
And so it would be then unjust for you. If society is the one who determines justice, then it would be unjust for you to oppose society, correct?
No.
Okay.
It's the society that I live in allows its individuals to either agree or disagree with the policies that are put forth.
Okay, but let's say a society doesn't do that. There have been societies. So take Martin Luther, King. He stepped out and he went against his society, and he engaged in protests and things like that. Was that, according to you, is that something he ought not have done?
No, I don't think it's what he ought not do.
Okay, he can do that if he wants.
Yes.
Okay, so it's interesting. I see you kind of, from my perspective, you're simply just moving all over the place, and you don't really have any sort of grounding for ever saying that anything or anyone is responsible for anything at all, other than if they go against a societal norm, and that's what becomes injustice.
Well, I accept many different frameworks, right? From my perspective, and I don't mean this in an insulting way, Jason, but you have a very specific framework that you have put a lot of thought and study into, and you very much think that justifies and or gives justifications and warranted reasons for your beliefs. And you very much think that from the language that you use, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that your system also applies to others and that they're just in denial of it, right?
That would be correct. But I
Okay.
would say that.
Let me finish. Okay,
Okay.
go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, no problem.
No, I was talking about your worldview, and I'd like for you to say what you have to say before I move on to mine.
Well, what I was saying is I think you're actually what you're doing is you're saying you're actually doing exactly the same thing. You
Mm-hmm.
have a worldview and you have a standard which you are holding to just as much as I am. So I don't think that that's really a distinction.
Oh,
I
indeed.
think,
Yeah. That's a very good point. When it comes down to brass tacks, for me it is man and then God, and for you it is God and then man. So, like where the rubber hits the road is the notion that I think that there are many different frameworks, of which yours is one, and you might come from the position that there's really only one framework, and it accounts for why people think there are many different frameworks. Whereas my multi-framework perspective accounts for the fact that you have one of those many frameworks.
yeah, my particular framework, though, and you have to understand this, and you probably, I'm sure you do from talking to other Christian theists, is that my framework is not my subjectivity. I believe God has spoken. So
Mm-hmm.
if God has spoken, I am just as much under obligation and responsibility to his oughts, the things that I ought to do, as is anyone else.
Mm-hmm.
And so, with my presupposition, God has spoken. God has spoken in the 66 books of the Old and New Testament. Then you are correct when it comes to, do I believe that you or whoever else is not a Christian is simply suppressing that truth in unrighteousness? Then yes, I hold to my presupposition, and that is what my presupposition tells me. And I believe my presupposition can actually account for the morality, which it seems to me, I mean, you can correct me, but it seems to me you're kind of dancing around and trying to avoid. And when we were even talking about consciousness, the worldview. Now, the one thing I do
Hold
want
on a
to make.
second. I'm gonna before you make the next point, I'd like to
Yeah.
interject a little bit. So I accept that you believe what you believe. I'm happy for you to believe it. When you say that I'm dancing around things, this is at least the third time that I'll admit that I don't know, and not knowing, not having the certainty that you have, may not have value to you. You may want the certainty of being able to justify and account for the morality and consciousness. I'm not so brazen as to think that I need the certainty that it seems that you seem to be holding against me. Saying I don't know, one person's inability to account for things is another person's being intellectually honest. I value being intellectually honest, and therefore I don't know is a completely acceptable answer, because I would rather have questions that are unanswered than unquestioned answers.
Now, would you say that you're certain that you don't know, though?
Am I certain that I don't know? Am I certain that I don't know? That's a weird way of phrasing things.
Well, because you were saying that I have certainty. So what I'm trying to expose is that you have certain beliefs also. You have certainty.
I believe that there are things that I am certain about. I believe that certainty exists on a continuum. I have maximal certainty that I don't know the answers to morality and consciousness.
So then, okay, so you're saying that certainty is based upon a scale of probability. Is that correct?
For all things that are possible, they are tethered to things that are probable.
Now, is that is that simply a probabilistic claim in itself, or is that a certain truth? Is it certainly true? Is it absolutely true that truth is measured on a scale of probability?
Based on my predictive model, truth is provisional and certainty is is scalular. I don't know if that's not a word. That's an inside joke, but yes.
So that particular answer is not certain. It's just you think it's probably true.
It works. I'm as maximally certain as I need to be. It is a basal assumption The things
Yeah.
that that you claim certainty for, I just have a basal assumption about and work forward from there.
Yeah. I mean, my opinion would be is that you have to have certainty in order to actually exist in God's world. In other words, you have to assume the validity of induction, the laws of logic, your ability to at least reason to enough that you can actually function in this world, that your reasoning is at least trustworthy. So I would say that you have certainty about those things, and if you didn't, that you could not function within God's world, which is, from my perspective, this is my position, Christopher, that all human beings have certain and absolute truths that they know and they must actually know, and God has graciously revealed to them so that they can actually function within His reality. Because a being, a human being, a creature, as myself and you, we do not have omniscience. We do not possess all knowledge. So our ability to apprehend and know anything to be certain is not possible from a creaturely, non-omniscient position. And so what God has done is He has, from His own knowledge, because as creator, He obviously knows His creation, He has revealed to His creatures the necessary things that they have to. He's revealed it to them so that they know it with certainty. Those things that they need to know in order to function within His reality. And so I believe, for example, that you don't question induction, that you don't question the uniformity of nature. You trust in it, and you have a certain knowledge, and you believe it's true. You assume and believe the laws of logic to be valid and absolute. And you need those things in order to actually function within God's world. So,
and I accept that you think that, and it seems coherent from your framework.
yeah. Alrighty. So, any questions you have for me as a Christian?
No, it seems like you're doing a great job, living life, being a good guy. Please continue doing what you're doing for the reasons that you do it.
That's all those things are only by God's grace. So, anything good that from my position as a Christian, anything good that I do is because God has graciously allowed me to do that. And if I was left to myself, if God left me to myself, that I would that I would only do that which is opposed to Him and His own nature, and that God is gracious and He does save people. Alrighty, well, it doesn't look like the realistic nihilist joined us today. He said he was going to join in, but let's see if he emailed me back. Nope, I don't see any response from him.
Was he? Are you sure that he knew it was 11 a.m. Eastern?
Well, I did say 11 a.m. in my email to him, so, and he said it was good. So
maybe he had a rough night.
Yeah, never know. So, alrighty. Well, thank you, Christopher, for joining in today. I think it was an interesting discussion. You're welcome to join in at any other time if you want to do so.
Yeah, just give me a heads up.
Alrighty. Well, I think we're just going to go ahead and end the broadcast from there. And you have a great rest of your day, Christopher.
You do the same, Jason.